Hello and welcome to the second case presentation. My name is Brenda Bryant and I'll be discussing the character of Robin in the 2004 movie The Woodsman. Now Robin does not appear in this film for very long, but she does play a very important part in Walter's self-discovery. And I did choose to highlight her role because in many cases of childhood abuse, we may not have much information. We may just get a quick moment when something doesn't appear right, when a child mentions something so quickly that we may miss a bigger issue. So I chose to look a little deeper into Robin's story and think about how I would approach a young person's small but significant story. So in the film, we meet Robin, and she is an 11-year-old Caucasian female. She is well dressed. She is well stocked with some bird watching tools. You know, she has a pair of binoculars. She's got her notebook where she's keeping pretty vigorous notes. She appears to be a very intelligent and pretty well-spoken young lady at 11 years old. And we learn that she lives with her father. Now, while we don't have much information on Robin's individual situation, there are some important clues that indicate that she has been exposed to a number of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, as you were. The more exposure a child has to these adverse experiences, the more likely their stress response system becomes dysregulated. This can result in poor boundaries, poor self-esteem, and a higher probability of risk-taking behaviors. So we hear Robin tell Walter that her father doesn't like it when she's out past dark. And the implication here is that she lives in a single-parent household. We don't know if it's from a divorce. We don't know if it is abandonment or possibly even a parental death. But the impact of this stress on adolescent development can result in adjustment problems for youth who can then internalize a lot of behavior. And so we see while she initially does refuse to leave with or sit on Walter's lap, she eventually does feel obligated to grant Walter's request, even though she's visibly uncomfortable and upset by his request. And it's revealed later that she has been indeed abused by her father. Her further comment about being home before dark brings some concern, as it appears that Robin is spending a lot of time outside the home, as much as she can, in fact. And a particular concern is that how she is spending this time, isolated and by herself, putting her at further risk for victimization. Robin's current exposure to these multiple adverse experiences has the potential not only to impact her life at this time, but also to impact her development, her ability to experience healthy relationships, and her long-term health. As discussed in the last slide, we can surmise that Robin is exposed to multiple risk factors, including being a child in a single-parent household. With no mention of any siblings, she very well may be isolated in her home with the abuser. She does not appear to have any age-appropriate friends. And when asked, she says that she has friends, but we find out later that her friends are, in fact, the birds that she's studying. Additionally, Robin's self-esteem is very damaged. When Walter says to her that she's a pretty girl, her immediate response is, "No, I'm not." What is hopeful is that Robin does have some important protective factors that will be important, including the fact that she is clearly an intelligent child. She's very resourceful. She can navigate, the bus system. She knows her way around her town. And she has a very robust knowledge and interest in bird watching. In fact, she identified 60 varieties of birds within her park and her locale. She's supplied with binoculars and notepads. She's well dressed and groomed, all indicating that she, has some financial resources. And it does appear that she attends school, as her interactions with Walter appear to happen later in the day, and she happens to be wearing a backpack. Now, Robin does appear also to be physically healthy and well groomed and quite observant of her surroundings. So when I begin to look at my role at assessing Robin's current circumstance and environment, I want to talk about what steps I will take. First and foremost will be a referral to Child Protective Services, which here in Connecticut is a Department of Children and Families. This will most likely lead to an in-home investigation, which will undoubtedly lead to additional stress for Robin. It will be very important during this time to try and find trusted adults and family members who can be of support for her. The creation of a genogram, a family genogram, will be useful in helping to identify those positive and healthy relationships. A youth connection scale is another tool used to identify positive adult relationships. And additional assessments such as a functional behavior assessment, chosen with careful consideration to trauma, can help to measure the impact of the abuse on Robin's current functioning. Other assessments such as the child life events measure other life impacting events, including changes in family composition, upheavals in living arrangements, death of people close to the child, school changes, legal problems, and family accomplishments may also be of help. Contact with the school social worker may help to structure after-school activities, as well as possibly facilitating peer group relationships. And any additional referrals that I see as needing to be appropriate. Now, I want to make note that I would not necessarily use all of these assessment tools. Certainly, there is additional information that I would need from Robin before making a decision on what sort of tool that I would want to use, or tools. And additionally, I would want to take great care to not re-traumatize or compound the emotional stress that Robin is already feeling. So choosing an assessment tool would definitely require additional information and contact with Robin before I would feel comfortable actually administering any assessment. Now, in thinking about some cultural and ethical considerations, I recognize that Robin is a girl who has experienced multiple adverse experiences. She's being abused by her father. She's being, targeted and victimized by people in the community. She appears to have no relationships with children her own age and has possibly lost a mother. I would definitely need to make a report because of the abuse. She is a child who is unable to set limits within her relationships, and she definitely strives to avoid conflict. She's a people pleaser. And for these reasons, there are multiple ethical considerations that I must be really focused on. Again, being a mandating reporter and making that call to DCF in order to protect her from additional maltreatment. And while it may take her time to be removed, if at all, from her home, there are other things that I can do to ensure her safety. So one thing that I would want to understand is how emotions are expressed in her family. As assessments and interventions begin, knowing her level of comfort and expression will be paramount to creating a therapeutic relationship. Additionally, recognizing that Robin may recant her story, as she may not want to lose what is left of her family. I would want to ensure that she is able to continue using coping strategies that she has already created to help her manage this emotional stress, including, her bird watching hobby. It clearly does bring her joy, and it has worked for her thus far. And lastly, childhood sexual abuse begins with horrific violation of boundaries. And as an adult in Robin's life, being aware of healthy boundaries within the context of this therapeutic relationship will help, hopefully to gain her trust. And finally, I want to recognize that my assessment strategy is really based on careful examination of the limited time we have with Robin. Again, mirroring possible cases that I may be assigned to as a social worker. My observations of her behavior and communication are critical, particularly if I'm working with a child who does not want to or is unable to share their stories for whatever reason. I think that learning to quietly observe behavior, particularly with children, can provide some important information and cues. I also acknowledge that this is a movie, and I did take some liberties with some of Robin's story. However, in an actual case, documentation, interviews, and collaboration will happen on a much more comprehensive basis. Boundaries I've talked about quite a bit extensively, simply because abuse happens with the violation of our most basic boundaries and destruction of our relationships that we hold so dear. And so making sure that I'm holding and maintaining professional boundaries will be paramount to ensuring Robin's safety. And finally, the use of trauma-informed care is useful not only to understand Robin's behavior and possible needs, but also to make sure that, I'm aware of my countertransference and vicarious trauma as well. So thank you for listening. This was an interesting case to present given the limited information that we had, but I was able to really kind of take a step back and really observe Robin's, behaviors rather than take things at face value. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing other case studies as we finish the semester. Thank you. Be well.